What if the greatest secret of human history has been hidden for over 700 years, buried behind stone walls, written in a language no one truly understands, and protected by an ancient order that vanished without a trace? What if this secret isn't a legend or a myth, but a real doorway to other worlds, worlds that exist right alongside ours, just waiting to be opened by the right hands? Now imagine walking through the quiet ruins of a forgotten Templar fortress in Portugal. The air is thick, almost alive, filled with a weight you can't explain. Every step feels like it's taking you closer to something sacred and forbidden. Your hands tremble as you pull the last stone from a sealed wall, untouched for more than 700 years. Dust fills the air as light spills into the hidden chamber, and what you find inside is not treasure, not gold or relics. It's something far more powerful. A single manuscript, sealed inside a strange metal box that hasn't rusted or aged at all. A box that scientists would later discover was made of no known material. And inside that box is a document that could shake the foundation of everything we know about science, time, space, and reality itself. This isn't a fictional story. In March of 1952, a real archaeological team, led by the French professor Marcel Dubois, made exactly this discovery at the fortress of Tamar, the once powerful stronghold of the Knights Templar. What they found wasn't riches. It wasn't anything the world had ever seen before. It was a manuscript that claimed to give exact, step-by-step instructions on how to open gateways into other dimensions. And it wasn't just a book of myths or symbols. It was written with precision, like a scientific manual. It described specific materials, tools, rituals, and calculations. It wasn't poetry. It was a blueprint. And what was even more shocking was that this manuscript wasn't unique. It mentioned two other copies hidden in Europe, placed in Templar strongholds in the Alps and Rome. The one found in Tamar was only one piece of a much larger, hidden truth. Tests confirmed the manuscript came from the 13th century, right during the height of the Templars' power. But the information inside was far beyond the science of their time. It referred to things modern quantum physics is only beginning to explore: concepts of layered realities, dimensional breaches, and controlled consciousness travel. The manuscript was divided into 12 parts, each one more complex than the last. The first explained how to mentally and spiritually prepare. The next described physical tools needed to manipulate dimensional energy. Later sections detailed how to open dimensional rifts and warned of strange beings that lived in those spaces. The deeper Professor Dubois went, the more terrified he became. His personal notes, found years later, revealed a man unraveling. He wrote, "This is not superstition. This is not magic. This is a technical guide for something we are not ready to understand." Soon the manuscript was handed over to Oxford University, where Professor Jonathan Blackwood began his analysis. But the moment he and his team started working with it, something strange happened. The symbols in the book would change, not just in meaning, but in shape. A spiral in the morning might become a triangle by afternoon. It wasn't imagination. Photos confirmed it. And worse, those who studied it began having dreams of alien landscapes, and eventually claimed to understand symbols they had never studied. The manuscript wasn't just being read, it was reading them. Blackwood theorized the manuscript was part of a language that didn't belong to this world, a kind of communication that connected realities. He categorized the symbols into three groups: Some opened rifts, others guided the mind through dimensions, and a few acted as protection to keep the soul anchored to our world. But it didn't stop there. In 1961, a little-known German scientist named Heinrich Cornelius contacted the CIA. He claimed to have translated the entire manuscript. Cornelius had studied quantum physics in Berlin, but had dedicated his life to what he called dimensional mechanics. Most scientists thought he was delusional, but his calculations and translations were too precise to ignore. The CIA launched a classified project called Manuscriptum, giving Cornelius unlimited access to the manuscript, funding, and a team of specialists. He confirmed that the manuscript contained instructions for 3 keys, methods for opening dimensional gateways. The first key allowed a person to observe other dimensions without physically crossing over. It required meditation, specific symbols drawn in star ink, a rare mixture of silver, quartz, and meteor dust, and a circle aligned with constellations. Cornelius tested it and described seeing alternate Earths, worlds made of pure energy, and timelines where human history played out differently. The second key allowed a traveler to physically walk into another world, connected only by a silver cord that tied them to their original dimension. It was far more dangerous. The ritual required fasting, strange herbs, and chemical preparation. Only some dimensions could be entered this way, and only if they were permitted by mysterious beings called the Watchers. Cornelius made 3 such journeys. He returned from one world where humans were immortal but emotionally empty, another filled with sentient aquatic life, and a third where Earth was still a lifeless ocean. The third key was the most terrifying. It allowed for permanent migration into another dimension. There was no coming back. The traveler would slowly become less human and more attuned to the new reality, leaving everything they once knew behind. The manuscript said this was a last resort, used only when a person or civilization had no choice but to flee their dying world. Cornelius believed some ancient civilizations might have disappeared this way, choosing to cross into safer realities. He even thought some modern missing persons might have unknowingly activated the keys. But in his final notes, Cornelius revealed something more disturbing. He believed the 3 keys were never created by humans. They were given to us by the Watchers as a test, not to see if we could use them, but to see how we would choose to use them. The manuscript, he believed, was not just a manual. It was a challenge. 6 months after Cornelius mysteriously vanished, the CIA launched Project Doorway in complete secrecy. They built a massive underground facility in Nevada, 200 meters below the surface, to replicate the keys and test the methods. The first test was conducted by Dr. Michael Harrison, a physicist who had worked on the Manhattan Project. He recreated the first keys set up precisely, building the circle, preparing the ink, placing the symbols. At 2:47 p.m. on March 15, 1963, he began the ritual. Every piece of equipment nearby started malfunctioning. Clocks moved at different speeds. Radios picked up strange sounds. The air around him shimmered like heat on pavement. For 3.7 seconds, security footage captured something that still cannot be explained. Harrison's image flickered. 2 versions of him appeared at once. One had different clothes, a scar that didn't exist before, and the background had changed, showing a version of the room that didn't match reality. When the flicker ended and Harrison woke from his trance, the room was silent. And then he whispered the words that would change everything. It worked. My God, it really worked. And that was only the beginning. He didn't just witness strange things during the experiment. He saw other realities, real, living dimensions that existed side by side with our own. And even more unsettling, he saw other versions of himself living entirely different lives. In some of those realities, he had made different decisions, chosen different paths, and ended up as completely different people. Some versions of him were happy and successful, others were lost or broken, and some were actually running the exact same experiment he was running, but in their own world, in their own version of reality. What he experienced was not just a glimpse through a window. It was a full immersion in parallel worlds that were alive and active at the same time as his own. The effects of the experiment didn't stop when it ended. For weeks afterward, the space where he had opened the dimensional circle continued to act strangely. Instruments picked up strange data, and the air itself felt heavy and unstable. Thermometers showed temperatures that made no sense. Some spots inside the circle were 15 degrees colder than the room around them, while others were 20 degrees hotter. These hot and cold zones moved around by themselves, as if controlled by something unseen. Objects left in the circle didn't behave normally either. A simple metal pen left at the center for just 24 hours began to show rust and decay as if it had been exposed to the elements for 30 or 40 years. Time didn't seem to move in a straight line in that space. A small plant placed near the edge grew 30 centimeters in one night, but its leaves had patterns and genetic features that didn't exist in any plant on Earth. The plant was alive, but wrong in some fundamental way, like it came from another world entirely. After those first events, they prepared for a second test. This time they wanted to go even further, to try not just seeing another world, but actually entering one. The person chosen for this dangerous task was Dr. Sarah Chen, a respected biophysicist who had spent years studying how human consciousness can shift during altered mental states. She had read all the reports from the first experiment and believed she understood the risks. She volunteered willingly, knowing full well what might happen. Her preparation followed the ancient manuscript's instructions exactly. For 7 days, she isolated herself, fasted, meditated, and underwent tests. During those 7 days, her body started to change in strange ways. Her temperature dropped by 2 degrees and stayed that way without any negative effects. Her brain wave activity shifted dramatically into frequencies that didn't match anything in medical records. On the morning of the experiment, she stepped into the dimensional circle at exactly 9 a.m. For 17 minutes, she stood inside calmly. Then, without warning or sound, she vanished. There was no noise, no movement, just a brief flash of white light, and she was gone. Cameras recorded it all. 1 second she was there, and then she wasn't. For the next 7 hours, the circle remained empty, but strange energy continued to swirl in the air. Machines picked up readings that showed something invisible was still present, some kind of unseen energy occupying the space where she had stood. Then, at exactly 4:23 p.m., she returned just as suddenly as she had left. There was no sign that anything had changed, but everyone in the room immediately sensed that the woman who came back was not exactly the same. She looked like Dr. Chen, but she brought with her things that should not exist. Her clothing now contained materials unknown to any science on Earth. Tests showed fibers made of substances not listed on the periodic table. In her pocket were seeds, living biological samples from plants that no scientist could identify. When planted, these seeds grew into strange, beautiful shapes that bent in impossible directions and had colors that shifted in ways no plant should be able to. But what shocked the scientists even more than the objects she carried was the new knowledge she possessed. Sarah could now solve complex mathematical equations that she had never studied before. She spoke 3 new languages fluently, including one that she later admitted didn't even have a name in this world. She had an instinctive grasp of advanced quantum physics theories that even the top minds in the world were only beginning to explore. When asked how she learned all this, she simply replied, "I brought it back with me." But her return came at a price. Sarah said that while she was gone, she had existed in both realities at once. She wasn't fully in the other world, and she wasn't fully gone from this one either. She described it as being stretched, pulled between 2 places, living in 2 versions of herself at the same time. It made her question which world was real. Even after returning, there were times when she still wasn't sure. Sometimes she would touch an object and feel that it didn't belong. Sometimes she would speak a sentence and forget which language she had used. She said that part of her never really came back. As the experiments continued over the following months, the entire underground facility began to change. At first, it was subtle, machines malfunctioning, strange noises, temperature shifts. But then it became undeniable. Concrete walls became transparent for short periods, letting people see through them as if they were made of glass. Hallways stretched far longer than they should, creating impossible space inside the building. Workers reported finding entire rooms that weren't on the official blueprints, rooms that vanished the next day. The final experiment was supposed to be a carefully measured test of the first phase of what they called the Great Crossing, but it was abruptly canceled when the scientists discovered something terrifying: a 3-meter-long fissure in space itself. It looked like a crack in reality. No one could measure its depth. It remained open for 3 days. During that time, strange things happened. Objects near the fissure vanished. Eerie sounds, whispers, roars, and otherworldly hums came from inside. A few people swore they saw movement inside the crack, as if creatures were watching from within. When the fissure finally closed, it left behind a zone where the laws of physics were altered permanently. In that small area, water flowed upward. Metal objects became magnetic for no reason. People who entered it for longer than 5 minutes reported hearing whispers in unknown languages, even when alone. Eventually, the entire facility was shut down, sealed in reinforced concrete, and labeled a forbidden zone. But the truth had already been revealed. The Templar manuscript was not a myth. It contained real instructions to alter reality. Over the next 50 years, researchers and seekers tracked down and interviewed 17 people who said they had successfully used the techniques in the manuscript. Their stories were scattered across the world, but their experiences shared striking similarities: strange encounters, new knowledge, impossible changes, and overwhelming emotion. One of the earliest testimonies came from Sarah Mitchell, a 23-year-old librarian at the University of Cambridge. In 1978, while organizing rare books, she discovered a worn leather notebook that looked like it contained medieval scribbles. Curious and long interested in mysticism, she began decoding the symbols using texts she found in academic journals. Without realizing it, She was reconstructing the first dimensional key. She thought it was just a puzzle, but on October 15th of that year, she tried it for real. She created the ritual circle in her small apartment. She didn't have the special materials, so she used regular candles and her own interpretation. That night, the walls of her room turned transparent, but instead of seeing into her neighbor's apartment, she saw another world, another version of her room in another place. She saw alternate versions of herself. In one, she was a respected doctor with a large house and a happy family. In another, she had died young in a car accident. In the most disturbing one, she was doing the ritual at the same time, and that version looked up and saw her too. It was a moment of mutual recognition. She realized she wasn't just watching, she was also being watched. And there were other beings, unmistakably not human, who were watching both versions of her from some space beyond understanding. Sarah tried to repeat the ritual several times in the following years, but she could never fully recreate that moment. Still, her perception had changed forever. She developed what she called residual sight, the ability to briefly sense other dimensions in her peripheral vision, especially during emotional stress or deep focus. Marcus Thompson, a Vietnam War veteran, had a completely different experience. In 1982, his life had fallen apart. He was going through a divorce, struggling with finances, and haunted by PTSD. A friend handed him a book with strange symbols and told him it was a kind of escape. Marcus thought it was a figure of speech, but he was desperate and willing to try anything. Without any formal preparation or real understanding, he followed the instructions for the second key, walking between worlds. He performed the ritual in his basement, alone. The result was life-changing. He disappeared for 3 days, according to his ex-wife. But to Marcus, it felt like weeks. He found himself in a version of Earth where the Vietnam War never ended. In 1982, it was still going, but with strange, advanced weapons and unfamiliar uniforms. He said it felt like technology had evolved in a completely different way, and the war had spread globally, consuming the planet. He saw other versions of his old army friends, some who had died in real life, still fighting on in that world. But the most disturbing part wasn't what he saw. It was what he felt. He was living in 2 places at once. He could feel the floor of his basement under him, but he could also feel boots in mud, weapons in hand, and the burning air of combat. For days, he felt stretched, like he was being pulled between 2 lives. When he finally returned, his body had changed. Scars from the war were gone. A birthmark had changed shape, and he now spoke fluent Vietnamese, something he had never learned properly while stationed there. One of the most carefully studied cases came from Dr. Elena Vasquez, a psychiatrist from Chile. In 1995, she was studying how rituals and altered states affect the brain. She came across references to the Templar manuscript and decided to conduct a controlled experiment. With full medical equipment and assistants present, she followed the first key's ritual. During her 17-minute trance, her vital signs went wild. Her temperature rose and fell rapidly. Her brain produced frequencies that should be impossible. Cameras captured her image flickering, as if more than one version of her were occupying the same space. Dr. Vasquez later explained that she had visited a world where psychiatry used completely different methods. Instead of drugs, They helped patients by connecting them with healthier versions of themselves from other realities. She returned with new techniques, ideas that don't exist in modern medicine but that worked when used. Some of her colleagues still use those methods, unaware of their origin. So why did these few succeed when so many failed? The answer lies in something deeper than knowledge. Each of these people had already developed, intentionally or not, a high level of mental frequency. Sarah Mitchell practiced meditation for years. Marcus Thompson, through extreme trauma, had learned to shut off logical thought and enter altered states. Dr. Vasquez had trained her mind through years of working with consciousness. Science is starting to understand that human awareness works like a radio. Most people stay tuned to one frequency, the everyday world, but some people learn to shift to other frequencies. Through practices like deep gratitude, focus, stillness, and intentional awareness, they begin to tune into other layers of existence. All of these people shared one thing in common: a deep, quiet connection to higher frequencies of thought. If you want to access these hidden parts of reality, the first step is not belief. It's alignment. You have to raise your vibration. You have to shift how your mind listens to the world. And there's a way to do it. It's called the Quantum Thinking Challenge, a 21-day journey to tune your mind to frequencies that unlock parts of existence most people never notice. You'll reprogram your thoughts with daily gratitude, deep focus, and expanded awareness. Over time, people report sudden insights, powerful intuition, and the feeling of waking up from a life they didn't realize they were sleepwalking through. The real question is, are you ready to find out what your consciousness is really capable of? If so, you know where to begin.